Welcome to the first learning module to allow folks to find out more information about applied behavior analysis. My name is Julie Stanley. You'll see the contact information on this slide. I hope that you will feel free to reach out if you have any questions at the end of this learning module. I'm happy to be available to you via email or through my cell phone. At the end of this module, you'll be able to loosely define what applied behavioral analysis is. You'll be able to tell why applied behavioral analysis is important in schools and in the school setting. And you'll also be able to identify the role of the board certified behavior analyst in your school. Here are just a couple of terms that's helpful to understand as you go into the training. They're terms that are used over and over again, and so you can see them defined on the screen. A contingency is just an if-then, and so if you come to a training, you get paid. If you sit quietly on the rug, then you can get attention. The next definition is a variable, which can really be any aspect of the environment. You can see the examples on the screen there. It could be the lighting in the room, could be your learning history with someone. And then the last definition is of the word stimulus. And a stimulus is something that evokes or brings out a behavior. And that stimulus can also be any aspect or variable that's in the environment. So you can read on the screen that applied behavior analysis is a science. And so that means that the principles of behavior that are derived from this science have been tested and they've been experimented in different settings. You'll notice that the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis is the actual book. It's a collection of articles and research that folks have done in order to demonstrate that the principles, the interventions, and the strategies have been tested and have been shown to be effective. You'll notice that underlined is socially significant behavior. And so the definition of socially significant is just that it's a behavior that affects the way someone has access to daily living. And so a socially significant behavior would not be something that just is bothersome to you, that's an annoying factor about something that a child does, but that the behavior would really significantly make a change in how the child lives his daily life in school or at home. And so those are the behaviors that are really focused on through applied behavior analysis. So applied behavior analysis is developed from the work of the psychologist B.F. Skinner. It dates back to 1957 when he developed this idea that really behavior is caused by things that are in our environment. And so the process of changing behavior can really be changed or controlled by changing some aspect of the environment in which the behavior happens. And so prior to his understanding of this process, most people thought that behavior was caused by a thought process or by something that you couldn't actually see or measure. And so B.F. Skinner's principles were contrary to that, stating that you could indeed see and measure the things that provoked behavior, and by changing those aspects, we could then change the behavior of the person. So the focus of applied behavior analysis is on the behavior of people, although animals have come into play in the science. We won't be discussing that in these learning modules. The other thought is that people do think and feel, but we don't consider these events to be the causes of behavior. Undesirable behaviors like talking back to an adult or flopping to the floor are considered undesirable behaviors, and those are behaviors that we can measure, and that these behaviors cannot be analyzed as feelings. So just saying that someone's having a bad day does not lead to any kind of effective intervention or treatment that might change the actual behavior that we're witnessing. So behavior analysis ultimately answers the questions: what are the causes of behavior? Why do people behave as they do? What are the variables that are necessary and sufficient to explain the behavior? And how can we change those variables to change the targeted behavior? So there are some assumptions of applied behavioral analysis. We believe that almost all behavior is learned. We believe that behavior can be changed by altering either what comes before a behavior or what follows a behavior. And we believe that things in the environment can be changed to either increase, decrease, or maintain specific behaviors. So here you can see one of the very basic principles of applied behavior analysis, and that is what we call the three-term contingency. So the next slide is going to give you a nice visual to show you, but essentially the antecedent of the behavior, what we call the A, is what happens just before the behavior occurs, and that means just before regarding seconds, not minutes. The B of the contingency is just the behavior that we're trying to change, or our target behavior. And then the consequence. So what occurs immediately after the behavior is what we're really interested in. So here's a nice visual that outlines that three-term contingency. And you can see, given the two examples, two different ways that the ABC data could be collected in two different occurring situations. So when we refer to ABC data, we refer to those three contingencies, and it's a very common way that we collect data to analyze the function of behavior. That will be in another module, the function of the behavior being, what exactly is the child doing in order to get something, and what does that something look like. There are lots of other published tools and assessments that are used to identify the function of the behavior, but the ABC is very common and very easy for anyone to collect. So once you've identified the behavior that you are looking to either increase or to decrease, we look at this antecedents of behavior. So that is that A spot in the three-term contingency. And this is where I tell people you should spend a ton of time. Like, you're really going to front load children here to sort of set them up so that the behavior that you want either is not allowed to occur or is less likely to occur, or you're going to provide them with lots of scaffolding and support using strategies and interventions to be sure the behavior occurs so the child then can encounter some kind of reinforcement. Some of the kinds of antecedent strategies are listed here, and again, we won't go into detail in these particular slides, but some are priming, verbal priming using a visual schedule, and either teaching skills or teaching replacement behaviors for the behaviors that you're trying to decrease. I would say, if I had to give a percentage, you want to spend 80% of your time here in this antecedent place to create opportunities for children to do what it is that you are asking them or hoping that they do. So another way we change behavior is by focusing on the consequences of the behavior. So once the behavior has already occurred, there are different strategies and interventions that you put in place to either increase the behavior or to decrease the behavior. And so reinforcement is something that happens either by presenting something or taking something out of the environment that increases the likelihood that a behavior is going to happen again. We'll have a whole separate module series on what reinforcement is, how to implement it. And punishment is an intervention and a strategy that we use to decrease behaviors. And so, again, thinking about where we want to spend most of our time, we want to spend most of our time in thinking about how do we reinforce the behaviors that we want to happen. And so you can see that setting up the environment to have those behaviors happen are going to be incredibly important, so the child can then engage in sort of that cycle of behaving a certain way to get reinforced, to increase the likelihood that that behavior is going to happen again. A word of caution around punishment: there certainly is a place for punishment procedures and interventions. It's important to understand that there can be a whole host of negative side effects, and you see the article cited there that talks about when using punishment procedures, you also do run the risk of increasing other kinds of behaviors. So spending a lot of time in the reinforcement aspect for consequences of behavior is really important. So given that this module is sort of an overview of what applied behavioral analysis is, I just wanted to revisit the idea of what we look to do when we use ABA. We look to analyze the behaviors as problem behaviors that are always socially significant. We then design interventions to change the environment so that we can either improve or decrease behaviors. And we can do that in two ways, either before the behavior occurs as an antecedent or after the behavior occurs as a consequence. We also look to change the events that may have led up to the behavior, like flopping on the floor or talking back to an adult, rather than trying to change what people may refer to as a bad attitude, something that is very difficult to measure and very difficult to report on. Because ABA is a science, we're very data-driven. That means we collect a lot of information. We select one behavior at a time to focus on to change, and then we collect a baseline on that. How often or how long is that behavior happening? We implement our strategy or intervention based on some other analysis of the behavior that we'll talk about in other slide presentations. And then we monitor by collecting data consistently to see whether or not the behavior is either increasing or decreasing based on what our wants and wishes are for that behavior. So there's no guesswork. We're not talking in generalities and we're not making statements such as it seems like, but we're able to provide numbers to really indicate whether or not our strategies and interventions are effective. So who does ABA anyways? I often will say anybody with good people management skills is probably using principles of applied behavior analysis. A board certified behavior analyst, known as a BCBA, is someone that actually has an advanced degree in applied behavior analysis and has passed a national certification test. And so along with passing that test, there are some strict ethical guidelines that we must follow as BCBAs in order to maintain our license. The BACB, not to be confused with the BCBA, is the organization that actually certifies the board certified behavior analyst. So some practical aspects of ABA in the classroom to think about are that people, everyone, allocate their behavior to that which is most reinforcing. So now that you know why everyone does anything that they do, you'll begin to understand that behavior only continues when it gets some reinforcement. So if a behavior continues over and over again, looking at those variables we talked about, both the antecedent that happens before and the consequence after, really analyzing what's going on during that three-term contingency that really causes that behavior to continue is going to be important. Sometimes it may be you as a teacher or an adult or another child. It could be anything in the environment that is a variable. And so we'll talk more about functions of behavior that will help us again understand better why kids behave the way they do in one of the following modules. So as the BCBA at ACES, the Athol Community Elementary School, I'm available as a team member to help problem solve classroom behavior. That is, I look forward to working with teachers and other staff closely to design strategies and interventions that's based upon the ABA research to either increase behaviors or decrease unwanted challenging behaviors, both in the classroom and around the school environment. I also hope that in working with staff, I can be connected with families and meet with families on a regular basis to work with them either in their homes or in the school environment and do some teaching about what it looks like for them to implement these strategies at home to increase or decrease certain behaviors there as well. So this was a quick overview of what applied behavioral analysis is. Future modules are going to talk about what is behavior and why does behavior happen. Those are those functions that I mentioned earlier in the slides. And then some variables of behavior change and how we can put those in place to either increase or decrease behavior. Thank you for joining me for the first learning module about applied behavioral analysis. Please remember this is just an overview. It's a starting point where we can branch off for some more conversations about things on this particular slideshow. I hope that you'll feel free to reach out to either of those contact points you see on the screen, and I look forward to being a team member and solving problems with you around behavior.